Hello everyone, welcome to my Batman Arkham Knight Knightmare difficulty, no damage walkthrough. We'll be tracking Oracle in this video, and this will go up to that point where we use the mechanic from Batman Arkham Origins, where we're reconstructing the crime scene, and then once that's done, the video will end. But it's going to be a while before we get there, because not only am I doing the main story, but I'll also be doing some of the side missions as well. And there is a lot of side missions available to you after you do Ace Chemicals and you escape. But before we escape Ace Chemicals, we have this past sequence right here where we're playing as Gordon, and can I just say that I don't really like Gordon in this game? I mean, not only is he underutilized severely in Batman Arkham Knight, so it's impossible to really feel any connection to him. I mean, really, like, Gordon isn't used that much in Batman Arkham Asylum, Batman Arkham City, and Batman Arkham Knight. In Batman Arkham Origins, I feel he's used a lot better. And I especially like the choice of voice actor. I feel like the choice of voice actor for Batman Arkham Origins, James Gordon, feels like it's respective towards someone who's actually fighting for the law, and I like that it captures his younger age. But the voice actor for Batman Arkham Knight's version of James Gordon, I'm not a big fan of. I know it's a voice actor from Breaking Bad, but I just feel like the writing and the way his voice sounds when he's delivering certain pieces of dialogue doesn't sound very good. Like, that whole scene where he comes down the elevator and he's like, what the hell is this? There's something wrong with the way he says that. It doesn't feel like a genuine, what the hell is this? It really sounds like he's just reading a line from a script. It doesn't feel like it's a genuine sense of confusion, where he's literally saying, what the hell is this? Compared to Ethan Winters from Resident Evil Village, when he says, what the hell is this? When he's seeing Mia as a hallucination. That actually sounded genuine compared to what it sounded like with Gordon. And there's just a lot of dialogue that Gordon says that I feel is a little too corny. Like, when you rescued the first Ace Chemical worker, and he says, great work, I knew you wouldn't let us down. I just feel like that's the kind of dialogue that you'd hear in some kind of cliched superhero, like, television show from, like, the olden days of superheroes. And it doesn't sound right, and it's like, why is he saying this out of nowhere? And it just feels kind of heavy-handed, all to portray this sense of Gotham feeling very over-reliant upon Batman. You know, because they expressed that a lot in the promotional, like, coverage for Batman Arkham Knight, they overused that a little too much in the game when it came to certain dialogue or certain characters saying it. And, you know, it's the same with certain pieces of dialogue that fit the Arkham Knight being Jason Todd. Like, one of the main criticisms that the Arkham Knight gets when it comes to the big reveal with Jason Todd is that there is so much dialogue that is just forced upon certain earlier parts of the game. Like, why is Batman suddenly thinking about Jason Todd in Panessa Studios? Why is Joker showing all this stuff about Jason Todd? And then why is there all this talk about Robin when Joker's discussing him? You know, it's that kind of heavy-handed storytelling that Seraphim17 pointed out in his walkthrough. And I 100% agree. You know, there's some aspects of the story for Batman Arkham Knight are not done very well, and especially with the characters as well, like I've already mentioned with James Gordon, and Barbara is underutilized also in Batman Arkham Knight, and I don't understand why. And also, one thing that is a little off-putting about the voice actor for Barbara in this game is how young she is in this game, whereas in Batman Arkham Asylum and in Batman Arkham City, it really felt like Oracle was older and not so much a teenager, but in Batman Arkham Knight, she's suddenly a teenager, and I get that it actually fits the comic counterpart for Oracle, because she's supposed to be this young teenager, but with Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City, you've already set up Oracle to be this kind of older individual based on the choice of voice actor, so it just seems a little odd that she's suddenly young all of a sudden. And it's very odd that the Gordons receive this treatment. James and Barbara just feel younger than how they were in Batman Arkham Asylum and Batman Arkham City. At least with Arkham Origins, Gordon made a lot of sense, and I feel like the choice of voice actor for James and Barbara actually felt right with Origins, but with Arkham Knight, it doesn't feel right with what I've just discussed. But right now, I'm just engaging in some of the side activities. This is a watchtower, so in the city, you'll be seeing red lights just on the side of buildings. That means that is a watchtower. And you have all the abilities available to you at the start of New Game Plus, so you're able to tackle them early compared to New Game, where you need to have certain gadgets in order to tackle some of these watchtowers. Like, for instance, there's a watchtower that requires you to have the remote hacking device, and you have to stand right above the three guys and hack into the drone operator's console so that you can then use the drone to incapacitate those enemies. And you'll be able to do that early on New Game Plus, which is great. And a lot of the watchtowers at this point in the game are on Founders Island, so that's why I'm going for them right now. There aren't any watchtowers in Miyagani Island and Bleak Island. And I do find the way the game introduces certain watchtowers and street checkpoints, and that's another side mission as well. On the street, there are these walls that the militia have set up that serve as a checkpoint, and you have to disable those checkpoints if you want the Batmobile to not have any resistance when you're in the middle of the main story. And that is something you're going to have to bear in mind. Certain side activities can have an impact on the main story because you're flying through the city or you're using the Batmobile and you happen to stumble upon a trap set by these watchtowers or these checkpoints that can definitely prove to be a hindrance. So I recommend dealing with them immediately so that you don't have to put up with them. And also right here, I'm doing the fireman activity, and previously I was doing one of the victims that Professor Pig killed. But there's a couple of them active. I mean, for the Professor Pig victims, all of them are active on the map right now. It's just you need the Batmobile on Founders Island if you're able to take on Valentine, which is rather insensitive of Batman. And I've already discussed this in my walkthrough, but it just seems like Batman's so over-reliant upon the Batmobile to actually transport villains whenever he incapacitates them. And Laszlo Valentine is the villain that perfectly captures this, and it just seems rather insensitive for Batman to be so forceful on forcing the Batmobile upon you when victims are being tortured by Laszlo Valentine. And I don't understand why they did this. I mean, why doesn't he just call upon a GCPD helicopter? Why doesn't he get a car? Or, like, why doesn't he take the Batwing and then transport Valentine onto there? That just seems very confusing and rather insensitive of Batman. Yeah, there's just some tonal inconsistencies present with this game that is a lot more noticeable compared to the previous games. And it's also with the way, like, the side missions are kind of part of the main story now, given that they're mandatory. But, you know, there are just certain parts of the side missions where you just see this different kind of personality to Batman, whereas the personality you see in the main story Batman is very different to how he's portrayed in the side stories, and it just seems like quite a ludonarrative dissonance right there. And also, with the fact that you can do certain main quests rather late, and in the process of going into those main quests, you stumble upon a side mission that the game doesn't penalize you for trying to go for them. You're just able to do them very freely. Like, for instance, when Scarecrow escapes Stag Enterprises and he reveals that fake Oracle has been captured and she's going to be executed, you don't even have to go for her immediately. You can do other side missions as well. Like, in one of my playthroughs of Batman Arkham Knight, rather than going for fake Oracle immediately, I just went for one of the APC lieutenants, and that is just very odd that the game lets you do that. But I shouldn't be surprised, because a lot of open world games do this, where you're able to do like 10 side missions before tackling a main story quest, where the writing indicates that the character's going to die in about 5 minutes, but because there's a floating timeline with these side missions, you're able to partake in them without any consequence to the main story, which is rather hilarious. But that was one of the watchtowers I did just then with the remote hacking device. So you don't get this upgrade immediately in the original new game, or maybe you do. No, yeah, you actually get it immediately once you get access to the remote hacking device, but you can hack the drone operator and download their codes. And what you can do is you can cause the drone to detonate, but I can't imagine why you would want to do that. It's just better to wait until the drone targets one of these soldiers and then use the drone to incapacitate those enemies. And once you've used that drone to incapacitate the enemies, then it's destroyed. Like, that just seems like a better option. But I don't know if I'm going to be too reliant upon that ability, because I do think it's a little bit of a cumbersome process, because you have to be so close to the drone operator in order for the remote hacking device to detect the operator in order to actually download his codes. So it's a little too cumbersome, if you ask me. Here's a watchtower. There's a brute right over there. And yeah, the brute is kind of the replacement for the armored enemies from Arkham City and Arkham Origins. And this enemy, compared to the enforcers from Batman Arkham Origins, is obnoxious because he attacks so fast, and evading over that attack is very dangerous because of how fast it is. That's how fast that attack is for a heavy enemy that is like the biggest enemy you'll encounter. And if you counter it, you will not do any damage to him, but you will just stop the attack and you won't lose anything with your combo. Although there have been times where I've countered the Brute's very fast jab and I've lost my combo for no reason. It's some very poor detection on the game's part. It's not something new. I mean, it's something that's been like all the Arkham games, but it's more noticeable in this game. And here are these Serpent drones, which I love the way the attack animation works with the Serpent drone, where when you press square, when you're on top of the Serpent drone, the game teleports you right above the Serpent drone to do a preset animation. Not a lot of games do this. I mean, a lot of games just kind of force you to like judge your landing properly so that you can land on top of the drone, but it just leads to a lot of problems where the physics engine can mess up and you'll just be knocked off the drone due to some very clunky physics. Whereas with that whole system that they've implemented with destroying those Serpent drones, it's a preset animation, so therefore you're not factoring in physics, and Batman's just standing right on top of that Serpent drone and he's able to plant explosive gel, he jumps off, and then you can detonate it. Which I also need to talk about as well. They've changed the explosive gel massively in Batman Arkham Knight, and the explosive gel is pretty useless for the most part in Batman Arkham Knight, even more so in the combat. In the Predator sequences, it's kind of reliable, but they've changed the enemy AI to counter explosive gel, and you'll notice this a lot with the militia. But when you use explosive gel to incapacitate militia, and I think it's after you have the upgrade where there's an upgrade you can purchase that allows explosive gel, like place explosive gel on the ground to instantly incapacitate enemies. It's only with one enemy. The rest of the enemies will be knocked back and you'll have to go in there with ground finishes in order to finish them off. But when you incapacitate an enemy with placed explosive gel, the militia will actually adapt to that, and magically they'll know exactly what the explosive gel looks like, and they'll shoot it, even though they most likely haven't seen what the explosive gel looks like, which is rather confusing, but it's that design that makes the explosive gel useless for a lot of sequences. However, I did find a way to bypass this. If you place explosive gel at the bottom of a staircase, and also at the top of a staircase, because of the change in planes, because like you have a flat surface on one end of the staircase and then you have the incline with the stairs and then another flat surface, because the enemies can't really factor in the change in planes whenever they're walking up staircases, they're very late to detect the explosive gel once they get onto that flat surface where the explosive gel is. So by using that to my advantage, I'm able to use explosive gel at a greater frequency compared to what it would be like if I were to just be reliant on flat surfaces when placing the explosive gel. So what I do is, by placing explosive gel at the bottom and top of a staircase, if I detonate the explosive gel that's at the bottom of a staircase, the enemies will go up the staircase and they'll be very late to recognize the explosive gel that is at the top of the staircase, so I'm able to detonate the second explosive gel and incapacitate the enemies, which is definitely something you need to bear in mind, and I use it for a stealth sequence coming up, but I'll get to it when I get the chance. And right now we're doing another one of these Professor Pig side missions in a very dangerous situation. So Founders Island is currently occupied by a whole bunch of drones. And there is a drone unit, which is the Cobra unit, and the Cobra unit is a stealth enemy. In the Batmobile, you'll need to do stealth sequences with the Cobra drones, but because we don't have access to the Batmobile on Founders Island, given that the bridges are not down right now, you'll need to proceed with a bit of caution when doing some of the side missions on Founders Island. Because without the Batmobile, those drones will instantly murk you. But if you have the upgrade on your Disruptor, where you can sabotage the turrets that the drones use, when they fire at you, they will detonate themselves and they will be taken out, which is a really cool choice. I'm glad that Rocksteady put in an option that doesn't involve the Batmobile, and it takes away from how over-reliant you can be upon the Batmobile, given that's the way the game is designed, unfortunately. Like, there's so many situations where it does feel like the Batmobile is forced, or it just seems like there could be a better solution, but Batman just opts to use the Batmobile because he doesn't have that kind of flexibility and thought. Ooh, that right there. You see the way I'm grappling? So this wasn't a thing in Batman Arkham Asylum, Batman Arkham City, and Batman Arkham Origins, unless you're talking about grappling between gargoyle points. But aside from gargoyles, you could not grapple onto points that are on the same horizontal plane. So those beams that I grappled onto are on the same horizontal plane, and if this was any other Batman Arkham game, I would not be able to use the grapple in order to travel between these beams, because they're on the same horizontal point. On Batman Arkham Knight, you can. And this really increases your mobility when navigating the environment or trying to get to enemies and predator encounters. And again, this should have been in the previous games, but somehow it slipped their mind and they're only now introducing it 6 years after Batman Arkham Asylum. It's so confusing how now they're actually considering putting in these kind of small changes that really help mobility and help the combat on a fundamental level. Yet back then, they never considered those to be crucial to fundamental gameplay design. Like, I'll never understand the mentality that Rocksteady had when designing this game, because there are so many changes in this game when it comes to gameplay and when it comes to story details that really are indicative of a very confused developer. But I'll talk more about this point when I get the chance. But this is the last victim of Professor Pig that we need to identify. And we're going to be able to do the other side missions at the moment. And here is the checkpoint system right here. I just stumbled upon this one as I was trying to make my way over to that one checkpoint that I marked on the map. But one thing you'll notice about the map is on the bottom right, there are coordinates. So that's why I'm only leaving in those map moments for a bit, because you can just look at the coordinates at the bottom right to know exactly where I'm going. But with regards to these checkpoints or the watchtowers, you want to do this. You want to grapple right on top of them and hold L3 so that you can use the quickfire line launcher feature, which is another change that they've made to complement the traversal aspect, given that Batman Arkham Knight is supposed to represent Batman at his best, and the world is massive. But whenever you're out in the open world, and I think this also applies to certain Predator encounters as well that have like multiple flat surfaces for the line launcher to touch. But whenever you're out in these environments, if you hold L3 when the game detects that there are two pieces of geometry that the line launcher can actually attach to, Batman will use a quickfire line launcher feature in order to set him up right above the enemies, which is wonderful design, because when it comes to these watchtowers and checkpoints, using the fear takedown is a great way to start, and getting a height advantage over the enemies and actually benefiting the detection on the fear takedown, because you do have to be rather close to these enemies for the fear takedown to initiate, is something that really benefits strategic positioning. Like, strategy with these Predator encounters is wonderful, and it's definitely something that complements Batman's tactical mindset. And that right there is the freeze grenade. So on the original new game, you don't have access to the freeze grenades immediately. You have to go inside of Panessa Studios and go to a workbench that is in that cell block area where the prisoners are, and you'll find the freeze grenades right there. I don't know why the game introduces it like that. Batman should have just had it in his arsenal immediately. But I don't know if you can go inside the Panessa Studios before Ace Chemicals. On my original new game run, I went inside the Panessa Studios after Ace Chemicals because I assumed you could only go inside the Panessa Studios after Ace Chemicals, but I could be wrong right there. Here is a Predator encounter that takes place at the clock tower, which it's cool that you can get this done early before you escort Gordon over here. But I'm going to take down this medic, and then I'm going to plant explosive gel right next to these enemies, not to take them out, but to deal with an enemy that happens to come onto the ladder when I do the fear takedown. And you'll notice how it says double fear takedown. That would have been a silent double takedown in Batman Arkham City or Batman Arkham Origins, but because the fear takedown is kind of the replacement for the double takedown, and the double takedown didn't have any utility in Batman Arkham City and Batman Arkham Origins, given that the detection was so specific, and the only time you ever really had the opportunity to do double takedowns was when the enemies were in an investigative state, so it was entirely dependent upon random pathing. I guess that's why they removed it in Batman Arkham Knight in favor for the fear takedown, which I'm perfectly okay with. But I had to actually restart this encounter because I got screwed by my inputs. Because the ladder right behind me, I tried to climb it, but because I was crouched, Batman favored the corner cover animation because in order to go into cover on this game, you have to hold the crouch button and press X, and it prioritized that on its hierarchy compared to the ladder. So I ended up going into cover on accident, and one of the enemies spotted me, and so I had to restart because I took damage, which was rather bullshit. But right here, I'm just going to deal with the drones. You'll want to clear out the drones that are patrolling the streets, because if you're on your original new game run and you're trying to do Riddler challenges, the drones can attack you when you're outside of the Batmobile, and they will murk you very quickly with that Vulcan gun of theirs. And that right there, did you see that? Did you notice how the reticle changed to a circle and you just see like lines on the diagonal points? That means that I'm firing like riot rounds at these enemies that are running on the ground. It's non-lethal rounds, but at times when you're factoring in enemies alongside these drones, the game will prioritize the wrong weapon because it's context sensitive with what ammunition type it chooses. It's context sensitive depending on whether there are just normal henchmen on the ground or there's drones nearby. If the game detects that the reticle is on a drone, it will favor the 60mm cannon. If it detects an enemy on the reticle, it will favor the riot rounds. But at times the game has trouble differentiating between the two enemies if both of these enemy types are in the reticle's range. So it's a minor thing and it's not too much of a big deal, but this actually leads me onto a tangent that I want to discuss, the chases. You remember that chase I did in the first video of this walkthrough where I was trying to get those APCs off of Gordon's back? Well, those chase sequences are awful. There's a side mission in this game where you have to take down APC lieutenants, and it forces you to use the Batmobile to chase them down, and you're being very reliant upon a weapon known as the Immobilizer, which is a very cumbersome weapon to deal with, and I don't know why Rocksteady designed the Immobilizer the way it was, or why it takes multiple of these Immobilizers to actually take down these APC lieutenants, but the Immobilizer works in a very stupid way. The reticle will appear, it's context sensitive, and you have to wait until the reticle narrows so that you can then press circle in order to use the Immobilizer, and the detection is hit and miss a lot of the times, because whenever you're just moving the camera around or you're making a lot of turns, the game just has a lot of trouble keeping the reticle on that APC, so you'll lose the reticle and then it resets back to its beginning point, so you have to wait for it to narrow again, and if it falls or the reticle goes away entirely, you have to repeat that whole process. It doesn't save your progress on the reticle, it resets the timer on the reticle back to its default value, which is really stupid. And it just further adds on to how cumbersome the Batmobile chases are, because the AI is so gifted at doing all these turns that the Batmobile just isn't able to do. And a lot of this could be handled easily if the battle mode on the Batmobile actually had chase capabilities, or it had weaponry that was suitable for slowing down enemies, or one thing could have easily made these chases so much better. When you hit an enemy with the Immobilizer, it slows their movement down, but the enemies still maintain the same movement that they have even when you hit them once with the Immobilizer. And why is it that there's no kind of way to use the power winch to hook onto enemies in order to actually stop them from running away? And then you could actually like shoot their tires with the riot rounds to actually stop them from moving entirely. Like, why is there no possible way to make the chases optimized or to add some creativity in the mechs? Like, remember the Batman animated series when Batman is using those power winches on his Batmobile in order to slow down enemies, or he uses a hook to actually hook onto enemies and he stops them from running away in the cars? Or he uses other weaponry that can actually stop them from running away entirely. Like, why is there no kind of weaponry like that? And instead, it's all dependent upon clunky detection, a crappy reticle system, weaponry that just doesn't slow down the enemies in the slightest, and also it's dependent upon enemies that are gifted for doing all these turns that the Batmobile just isn't capable of doing. And it's so easy to take damage during these Batmobile chases because the dodge that is provided for the Batmobile when it's in its chase mode is horrible. At least the dodge in battle mode is a little bit more rigid, and you have a little bit more control over it. But with the dodge that's in chase mode, it's the loosest dodge ever for Batman Arkham Knight. The amount of times you'll accidentally collide with geometry, the amount of times you'll accidentally like go over ledges and you'll fall, and you have to get back on the path to actually chasing down these APC lieutenants or chasing down any enemy that involves the Batmobile, or the amount of times you'll not be able to gauge the distance the dodge will cover. And it's so easy to get into that whole mindset of accidentally misjudging where you'll actually dodge. It's so stupid. It's really stupid. Like, I do agree with those reviewers that the Batmobile just doesn't handle very well, and in chases especially. But in battle mode, you have a little bit more handling over it. But, you know, when you're dealing with so many enemies and they corner you, like they close you off from your exit routes when they like place their shots in the correct positions, and the Batmobile is just wide enough that no matter what you do, you're going to be hit by projectiles either way. Like, there's so many situations that can happen like that. It can definitely add a lot of panic, and it can add a lot of like looseness to the dodge at times when you accidentally double dodge or you accidentally dodge the wrong way. It's very, very annoying. And speaking of which, we're about to do another chase right over here. So you do have another option at your disposal for dealing with these enemies. You can just collide into them in chase mode. But in battle mode, even though I'm actually ramming into this guy, like you'll see me dodging into him, it doesn't do any damage. You have to be in chase mode in order to actually deal colliding damage with these enemies. Why? Why is that a thing? And also, another problem with the immobilizer is when the missiles collide with geometry. You have no control over the immobilizer when it fires. It's a guided missile, but if during its path it collides with geometry, it will detonate. Why doesn't this game have the whole system from Batman Begins? Like, remember on the PS2 version for Batman Begins, when you had those Batmobile moments? Like, the first Batmobile moment that you did, you had access to a missile launcher, and it worked off a very similar system to the immobilizer, where you're waiting for the reticle to narrow, and then once it gives you the option to fire it, you can press R2 to fire the immobilizer. Only on that game, if the missiles collide with geometry, it goes through the geometry, because any kind of guided missile system that is dependent upon an AI controlling the path that the missiles take should never collide with geometry. You should never be at the mercy of this kind of system. Like, if they're going to make the missiles collide with geometry, they should at least program in some kind of heat map system for the missiles where they can actually, like, understand that they're going to collide with geometry. So they do these dynamic moves. Like, did you see that just then? My missile collided with the geometry. It's so unfair. Like, they should have some kind of heat map system where they should be able to identify geometry that's in their way, and they should be able to take a dynamic path that allows them to bypass the missiles. But that's not the case at all. And I get it doesn't make any sense for a guided missile to do that, but when it comes to a mechanic that is already so cumbersome, like look how sporadic the detection is on this reticle. Like, it showed up for a bit and then it disappeared for no reason. Like, you're seeing that so much with its sporadic detection. Like, when the detection on this kind of weapon is sporadic, it should have that kind of ability where it should be able to dynamically navigate the environment, or just go through geometry entirely, like in Batman Begins. And, like, the whole sequence where you're chasing down that truck in Batman Begins when you're inside of the Batmobile, it feels a lot more satisfying than these kind of chase moments in Batman Arkham Knight. The Batmobile was done very poorly in this game, and I'm not a big fan of it. I mean, I'm not saying it's not fun. Like, when you're doing these battle mode sequences, and you're just using your dodges intelligently, or when you're using your secondary weapons, or when you're actually dealing with the right amount of enemies, it feels fun. But at times, you're dealing with combat situations where you're inside of a tight environment, and there are so many enemies coming towards you. And it's so easy to be put into a situation where they aim their weapons properly in order to cut off your exit points, and you'll take damage in the process. And it's almost like, for certain sequences in the Batmobile, they wanted to design it in a way where it's easy to take damage. Like, it's almost like no damage wasn't really at the forefront of thought when designing certain sequences for the Batmobile. But I don't want that to be the case at all. Designing a game for no damage ensures that the developers are being smart with their design choices. If they just let, like, no damage not be a factor to consider, then you get stuff like in Catwoman's Revenge. And Catwoman's Revenge on Batman Arkham Knight is the worst piece of content ever in the Batman Arkham series. Hell, it might even be the worst piece of content I've ever played in any game ever, because the developers, they were like brain dead when designing Catwoman's Revenge, or one of them was like schizophrenic, or they had a mental breakdown, and so they misinterpreted what actually is defined as being a functional game design in reality. But they make it where you're on top of an electrified floor that is slowly being electrified, and enemies are just going on top of the electrified panels just whenever they choose to do so, and you're at the mercy of a combat system where player agency isn't really what defines the Batman Arkham games. Like, the characters choose whoever they want to prioritize, you have no control over which animation the characters want to do, and you're taking damage during special animations if you happen to get on top of an electrified panel when you do a special takedown, or any kind of animation that Catwoman does that involves a lot of movement, like a lot of forward momentum. And that forward momentum on certain attacks can put you right on top of the electrified panel and you'll take damage. What were they thinking when designing that DLC? It's so throwaway. It's like they saw a lot of the backlash that Batman Arkham Knight received, and because a lot of that negativity just kind of got to their heads, it impacted the actual development of that DLC as well as the other DLCs involved with Batman Arkham Knight. But with Catwoman's Revenge specifically, the developers stopped caring about what they were putting in with Batman Arkham Knight's DLC with Catwoman's Revenge. And so that's why the quality really shows. It's like a high schooler developed Catwoman's Revenge. They reused assets from Batman Arkham City, and then they put in a combat sequence that is not befitting for the kind of free-flow combat that Batman Arkham is known for. Like, it's the worst combat encounter I've ever done in a Batman Arkham game, and it's the worst piece of content ever. It's not hard because it's legitimately hard. It's hard because it's broken. So therefore, it's not hard. I shouldn't be saying this kind of statement. It's broken. It's not hard. It is fucking broken. And that's exactly what the Batmobile chases remind me of, Catwoman's Revenge, and vice versa. And they were not done very well, and I'm very disappointed. But right now, I'm doing one of the expansion missions that is part of DLC. This is Mad Hatter's side mission, which it's an interesting take on a combat system. I mean, I'm not a big fan of how the camera is so close to the character, because the reason why you use a lot of the abilities in Batman Arkham's combat is because you have a lot of camera control and you can actually see the enemies coming towards you. But when they make the camera so close to Batman, it forces you to limit your options in combat, because if you try to be fancy or you try to go into beatdown animations and the camera is not on the other enemies, you'll take damage very easily because you don't know they're coming. So I'm not a big fan of this. And it was a problem that I had with one of the combat encounters in Batman Arkham Origins when you were on the final offer. You went into the casino and the camera was so close to you for 2 combat encounters that it just forced you to limit your options in combat. And that is why I don't like the camera here. And overall, Mad Hatter's side mission is just very average, and it's not that imaginative for a section. And I'm not a big fan of how disconnected it feels from the main story. Like, there's nothing here that just relates to the Arkham Knight's militia or anything that relates to the story. It just feels like an isolated mission that could have taken place outside of Batman Arkham Knight, and you would have still felt the exact same kind of emotions you would have felt right now. And, like, the scenarios that just take place, the things that Mad Hatter says, the things that Batman says, they don't feel like the Batman or the character that is actually within this world of Arkham Knight. They just feel like they're in a separate world entirely, just magically placed into the world of Batman Arkham Knight. And that's one of my main problems with Mad Hatter's side mission, and it's just not the most interesting side mission. I mean, this whole sequence right here where you're just doing this whole, like, fantasy world system through just some unspecified means, because Mad Hatter is almost supernatural in his abilities, and Rocksteady just gave Mad Hatter all these really stupid abilities that just don't make any sense. And it's just, it's something that feels like very artificial storytelling. It's just like writer's bias getting in the way because they want to do something creative, but they don't really do it in a way that actually fits the lore properly. So that's why they opted for this, and it just makes no sense. But whatever. I'm sure Rocksteady didn't want you to think of that when thinking of Mad Hatter's capabilities, because, you know, some of the villains that Batman encounters just seem to have these abilities that don't make any sense. But there's no point in questioning it. Just go with it. But we just have this last combat encounter right here, and on the second phase of this encounter, the hostage is going to attack you. And it works just like the Riddler informants, where you have to make sure that you don't accidentally knock him out. This game doesn't have the whole system from Batman Arkham Origins where you can put these informants into a surrendering state. you have to make sure that you don't accidentally do any kind of finishing animation on these informants, and you have to make sure you don't accidentally do any special takedown animations. Make sure you don't accidentally do the multi-ground takedown. I mean, I don't know if doing the multi-ground takedown here actually causes this guy to be incapacitated, because if he gets incapacitated, it will fail you, because it'll come across like Batman actually killed the guy when he actually didn't. He just incapacitated him, which doesn't make any sense. But I don't know why Rocksteady hasn't bothered implementing that whole system from Arkham Origins, because in Arkham Origins, when you put the enemies into this surrendering state, it doesn't force you to limit your options in combat. It doesn't feel like you have a ball and chain on yourself to force you to limit yourself in combat. You're able to be as liberal as you want with your abilities, so therefore, you're not being limited due to a really stupid mechanic. And it's just so confusing why they haven't implemented it into Batman Arkham Knight. But whatever, just make sure that you don't accidentally knock out that hostage, and you'll be able to do Mad Hatter's side mission. But right now we're doing the main story quest, and we're trying to track down Oracle. So Oracle has been kidnapped by the Arkham Knight, and the Arkham Knight has put her in a very specific vehicle, and we're tracking the tire treads of that vehicle right now, using the Batmobile's forensic scanner. And eventually, once we get to this point right over here, the game's going to introduce you to a side mission, which it makes into a main story quest. So there are these bombs that the Arkham Knight has planted throughout Gotham that you need the Batmobile in order to destroy, because there's a bunch of drones coming, and this is really like one of the hardest side missions in the game, because the area that you're in, because you can't get far away from the bomb, because if you do, the bomb will detonate. You have to restrict yourself to a very tiny area, and there are so many enemies coming for you, and when they mix up the enemy diversity with Diamondbacks, Mambas, or other enemy types, these sequences are very difficult. And it's a good thing that I have the upgrades to the Batmobile 60mm cannon, where I can deal a lot of damage to the body and the turret of these drones in order to take out the light drones instantly, or take out the Mamba drones instantly if I aim for the actual missile launcher. If you don't have these upgrades, these side missions are very difficult. And the thing is that the game makes you use certain upgrades. It makes you buy certain upgrades in order to do certain side quests, or to actually do some of the Riddler challenges, because without certain upgrades, you will not be able to do some challenges like that, which is definitely indicating that the developers really want you to slot into the upgrades, which I'm really glad as well. I'm glad that the developers don't try to encourage people to do no upgrade runs. I'm glad they're actually putting in systems that demand the use of upgrades to actually flesh out the game, to actually make the game a lot more balanced, and to really make sure you're not dragging out scenarios. Like the developers clearly value those kind of designs, and so they integrate it into certain quests, into certain challenges. And I think it's a really good idea, but right now, we need to do this Predator encounter in order to lower the bridge onto Miyagani Island. And I had to restart this Predator encounter once, and I've saved a blooper of this, but you will not believe how absurd the militia's perception is. And I get that the militia understand Batman's tactics, but at the same time, why would they look up randomly at a random gargoyle point that is nowhere near where I knocked out the guy? So, on my other attempt at this, I made noise using the dive bomb technique to lure enemies over to the noise, and then randomly, the militia who was heading towards me, or this guy wasn't even heading in my direction, he looks in some random direction, and he's not even looking in my general direction, or even like thinking of looking up, and he just spots me for no reason. It's one of the most bullshit design choices with the militia. And yes, I understand that they're supposed to be well aware of Batman's tactics, but don't have it be represented through stupid, like, artificial handicaps for the enemies. Just at moments where the enemies choose to cheat. It's really dumb. But right here, I used the fear takedown to take out the drone operator and the second guy, and then I used the dive bomb technique just then in order to lure these enemies, because this was something I noticed in Batman Arkham Knight, and it actually worked in Arkham City as well, in Arkham Origins, and they haven't changed it at all. But when you go into the dive bomb animation and you land on the ground, you make noise, and Batman's the only character who does this, aside from Batgirl from the A Matter of Family DLC. I don't think Robin has the ability to dive bomb, because his cape isn't built for that. Batman and Batgirl are the only characters who have the ability to dive bomb, and because of this, it gives you another way to make noise in order to lure enemies. And the thing that I've noticed with the dive bomb technique is that the enemies, like, you get a lot of moments where the enemies actually investigate the noise, whereas when you do knockdown smashes, which are a loud takedown animation, a lot of the times the enemies don't go and investigate the noise. But I'm guessing with the dive bomb technique, the programming is a little different. So because of the fact that enemies are actually investigating the noise of the dive bomb technique, I can actually incapacitate a lot of them, and I can put them in scenarios where I can do a silent takedown to regenerate my fear takedown, and then I can use the fear takedown again, which is very reliable. And that is the end of that Predator encounter, and now we have this part of the game where it's introducing you to Catwoman, and it's introducing you to Riddler. I don't know why they make certain, like, side missions main story quests. Like, they have to introduce these side missions through the main story. Like, they make these introductory moments with the side missions main story quests. They never had to do this with Batman Arkham Origins or Batman Arkham City. The side missions were introduced in a way that didn't actually serve as, like, main story quests. They were introduced as distractions, but not something that was like a quest. Like, when you get introduced to Mad Hatter in Batman Arkham Origins, you climb out of the sewers and those guys are dancing, and I don't feel like it was really like a way that felt like it had to do with the main story. It wasn't really a quest, it was just a distraction. Whereas here, they're making you do things, like they're making you do actual side missions as part of the main story. Like that bomb mission, they make you do a bomb, and you're going to be doing the exact same thing in the side missions. And then here, you're attacking Riddler bots, and you'll be attacking Riddler bots in the side mission as well. So I don't know why the game does this, where they make you do side missions as part of the main story. It's confusing. It's a very odd way to introduce side missions into a main Arkham game. That's rather odd, but that's odd with me, but it might not be odd to you. But we just need to take these guys out. And these Riddler bots are no different to the normal henchmen. The only difference between them is the Riddler bots can only be floored to the ground via explosive gel, the backclaw slam, and I think the quickfire batarangs can also floor him to the ground as well. I know none of Catwoman's gadgets do anything aside from the whip. The whip is the only gadget that Catwoman has that can actually floor those enemies to the ground, but there's no benefit. And you can't do ground finish animations on those Riddler bots because their parts spread out across the environment rather than maintaining the full body. So because it doesn't maintain the full body on the ground, you can't do the ground finish, which is annoying. You can still hit them on the ground with square, but that's really not that important to note. But we're now back to tracking Oracle, and we just have a couple of minor skirmishes with drones. And the game will introduce you to the whole mechanic of shooting the LED light with the Vulcan gun in order to instantly destroy these drones, which can be very reliable against the Diamondbacks, like I mentioned in the first video. But aside from that enemy type, there really isn't any other drone variant that demands you shoot the LED light, because it's just better to use your 60mm cannon, because wasting time trying to shoot that LED light, especially when the detection on the Vulcan gun isn't very accurate in its calculations, it's just better not to waste your time with the Vulcan gun most of the time. And also, when you do shoot the LED light, if you actually shoot the LED light on your first attempt at using the Vulcan gun, you will get a perfect bonus. But if you don't hit the LED light on your first attempt at using the Vulcan gun, you'll get a critical bonus. And I don't know what the bonuses do. I don't know what the whole incentive is for the critical bonus or the perfect bonus. It doesn't feel like it contributes to gaining increased amounts of secondary weapon energy. It doesn't feel like it contributes that much to your combo. Like, is it only there for the purposes of gaining more XP when an XP is already very easy to get? And by doing side missions, you can just get a lot of Wayne Tech points that way. Like, what is the whole point of the critical and perfect bonuses that you get for shooting the LED lights on these enemies? It's something that's always puzzled me to this day, and I doubt I'll really find a proper understanding of why those bonuses exist or what their whole intention is. Because if it's just for the purposes of gaining XP, then it's completely redundant because there's so many other ways of getting Wayne Tech points or gaining XP. And speaking of gaining XP, they have made some slight alterations to how you actually gain XP normally when you're dealing with thugs. So, in Batman Arkham City and then Batman Arkham Origins, when you were just beating up thugs in the open world, you were always getting XP. That doesn't exist in this game. It seems like you only get XP in Batman Arkham Knight when you're actually beating up thugs or doing Predator encounters during very specific sequences that are actually framed with an almost scripted sequence in mind. Like, for instance, when you're doing watchtowers or when you're doing those checkpoints, it's a mix-up of scripted combat and scripted Predator encounters, so it's those situations that allow you to gain XP. But if you're finding a bunch of rioters on the street and you just go ahead and beat them up as Batman, you will not get any XP. And I think that's because of the increased number of enemies on the street, thanks to the new hardware that they used for developing Batman Arkham Knight on the PS4 and Xbox One. But I don't really understand why they would remove that, because you're already presenting us with a very easy way of gaining like Wayne Tech points by doing a lot of side missions, and we're already getting XP from doing Riddler challenges. But like, you know, you've already set up a lot of designs in place for gaining XP and Wayne Tech points easily. So why is it that it's such a problem to just go out on the street and just beat up a bunch of thugs just rioting out on the streets? That doesn't sit right with me. I mean, it's just a minor thing, and it's not really that big of a deal. But it still baffles me either way that they would remove the ability to actually gain XP from beating up thugs in the open world. But right here, we're just going to take down that bomb, but I'm using the time to get rid of these drones here. And that's another thing as well. The forensic scanner can actually highlight these enemies through walls, so you can see which direction they're looking. I mean, it's already indicated on the map, but just in case you're more used to actually seeing them like through walls or seeing their actual physical model rather than on the map, it's best to just use the forensic scanner. And given that I'm talking about the Batmobile right now, I guess I should explain some of the abilities that the Batmobile has. So I've already explained the 60mm cannon and the Vulcan gun. The 60mm cannon is your primary weapon for dealing with drones, and then the Vulcan gun will allow you to shoot the weak spots on drones. Only the reticle isn't as accurate as you think. And then we have a couple of other abilities. So we have a missile launcher, a CPU virus, and an EMP blast. The missile launcher is useful for clearing out multiple enemies. The CPU virus will allow you to commandeer drones and use them as allies. So using this particular ability, when you have a lot of secondary weapon energy, it will actually chain between multiple targets. And using the CPU virus on very specific enemies like the Diamondback and the Mamba drone, those enemies can take a lot of punishment, and they'll be able to get rid of drones very quickly. So using the CPU virus on select enemies is one of the skillful aspects of the CPU virus. You can also use the CPU virus to hack Cobra drones, but you need at least 2 secondary weapon energy charges in order to do that, and that right there was badass. I don't know how I managed to avoid the Mamba drones as guided missiles, because normally you can't avoid those missiles. You have to shoot them out of the air with the Vulcan gun, but I somehow managed to turn in just the right way to avoid those guided missiles, and that's why I slowed it down, because it looked really badass. But the final ability that you have is the EMP blast, and I don't really find a lot of utilities for the EMP blast, or I really haven't taken the time to understand the full capabilities of the EMP blast, because all it does is just neutralize a bunch of drones. And I mean, it's useful for clusters of drones if they're actually close to each other, because you can just neutralize them and then take them out that way. But I still think the other weapons are just better suited for those kind of engagements. However, I have been thinking of using the EMP blast in a very specific way. So the drones on this game can actually damage each other. There is friendly fire for the enemies with the drones. And, you know, you're going to be put into those combat situations in the Batmobile where you don't have a lot of room to avoid the enemies. So I was thinking that maybe what you could do is use the EMP blast to temporarily shut down the drones, and then you can use those shutdown drones as cover, basically. So you put yourself in a position where those incapacitated drones are in between yourself and any other enemy that's shooting you. So they can kind of serve as makeshift cover, but I don't know how useful this kind of mechanic will be, because I haven't properly tested out the EMP blast, and I think I'll try to do so when I'm recording this walkthrough, just to see how useful the EMP blast is, because the EMP blast is my least utilized move by far. I don't use the move as often as the CPU virus or the missile barrage, but that remains to be seen. Maybe I'll actually think differently about the EMP blast if I test it out properly. But we now have this final part of the video, which is the investigative moment, which is using a mechanic from Batman Arkham Origins, which I thought was one of the most interesting parts about the investigation moments with Batman Arkham Origins. It really helped you feel more connected to the scene when you're actually witnessing how the events played out using the Wayne Tech satellites, which I'm assuming is how Batman is able to reconstruct these crime scenes using this particular technology to detective vision. But you'll see right here that the images are in a lot more detail. It's able to properly understand the proper proportions of the individuals, the shapes of their faces, the kind of clothing they're wearing. This was not the case in Batman Arkham Origins, because I'm guessing the version that Batman used in Batman Arkham Origins was still like a prototype version of the crime scene investigative tool that we're seeing right here. I'm guessing this is the mechanic at its best. But it's really cool that they brought back this mechanic from Origins, and sadly this is the only time we'll be doing this kind of crime scene moment. And I find it very funny, because like in Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and in Arkham Origins, there were always moments where you were scanning blood trails, or you were scanning alcohol particles, smoke particles, lead particles, and like there's a lot to scan with these crime scenes, and you know they implemented them so much more in those games than here, and this is really the only crime scene we'll ever be doing in Batman Arkham Knight, which I wonder why they made this choice right here. Because it just feels like a teaser, almost. Like, if they're going to be using this mechanic from Origins this one time, then you would assume that this would be a mechanic we're going to be seeing in future crime scenes, but they only introduce this mechanic once, and then you never see it again. So what is the whole point of this scene? You give us a mechanic that allows us to actually view the crime scene with how it happened, to allow us to be more connected to the scene, and then you never do anything with it again? It's so confusing. I don't know what Rocksteady was thinking when they were introducing this mechanic, but it really doesn't make any sense to me. It's almost like they just put in this mechanic just to tell fans that, oh, we remember Origins, don't forget that game even though it wasn't developed by us. That's the only form of reasoning I can think of as to why this mechanic is here only once and then we never see it again. But that's a question for another time. This is the end of this video, but here are a couple of bloopers right here. So this was during Mad Hatter's side mission, but there is a problem with the back claw where if you jump over an enemy and you do this particular animation, which doesn't class as an evade animation, you'll take damage during it, which is stupid. And then watch this. So I do the dive bomb right over there. I go up on this vantage point, and that guy, he's not even looking in my general direction, and he just spots me out of nowhere. How is that possible? And there were no other enemies right under me. Like, this is what I mean when I say the perception on the militia doesn't make any sense at all. It's there to give the impression that they're very intelligent and they understand Batman's tactics, but don't convey it in a way that makes it look like that they're a cheating AI. And this is why you got to be careful when you make noise, because a couple of seconds after you make the noise, within some time period, if you go onto a vantage point, the enemies just spot you out of nowhere. So you've got to be very cautious when doing these Predator encounters with the militia. But that is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.